Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. Welcome back to the Story 516 podcast. I'm Zach, and I'm joined today by a good friend of mine, Justin.
Hey.
So thanks for joining me today. And I was just curious if you could give the audience just a brief bio of who you are.
A brief summary. We grew up in Fargo-Moorhead and went to college at MSUM in town. And just recently, I guess it's 2.5 years now, I recently met my now wife, have moved down to be with her in the Twin Cities here. I work for a company that makes websites for print shops and does marketing and other stuff as well. And just recently also had my first child and had a son, and he is 7.5 weeks old. So I am thoroughly in that first time parent, new parent stage, often described to me as the blur. And so that's kind of in a nutshell where I'm at. And I've known Zach for a very long time. We grew up together, but really connected in college, kind of reconnected. And he was a grade older than me. And so we weren't necessarily in the same grade doing everything together, but at least at church. But in college, kind of reconnected and fell into the same social circles. And then from there, he's been a roommate for a very long time, up until I met my now wife, Melissa. So,
yeah, it's been weird the last couple of years not having you around as much.
For sure, it's definitely a transition. No offense to the roommates, but definitely having a wife is a bit of an upgrade.
Oh yeah,
so
totally understand. But yeah, when I was thinking about kind of the next group of people I was interested in talking with, your name came up in my mind as back in 2021, I think, you got COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and then you brought it back and spread it to like all of us in the house.
Yes.
Because you share and you were a generous person.
Sharing is caring, right? Yeah.
And I think we all thought, okay, we all basically got the flu, we're fine. But then for yourself, it ended up sparking this multi-year process of having long-term effects from that and just struggles with health. So I saw you struggling with like health, your emotional state, but then also developing resilience through that. So I was very interested in talking to you about how you saw God, your faith, intersect with those struggles.
Yeah, for sure. I can give a little more context. It was December 2021. It was kind of the up until that point, I hadn't gotten COVID, as far as I understand, at least not in any significant way. And there was a big wave that was kind of the COVID, the BA2 or whatever. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what the
Delta variant
was.
or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so it was kind of the wasn't even the near the first wave at all. So nearly 2 years into COVID, but yeah, I got COVID and it was a fairly mild flu for me, at least right away, and just kind of laid low. But then about 3 weeks later, very kind of strange, disorienting and confusing and debilitating symptoms started coming on. And there's if you're familiar with this, it's very much multi-system, lots of various symptoms that you can have, but mine included pretty severe fatigue, what's often described as brain fog, basically short-term memory issues, just feeling like you're not really present in reality. There's this kind of very strange feeling of being disconnected from reality. I started having panic attacks, severe anxiety, light and sound sensitivity. I was not able to work. I work on a computer, and if I even looked at a computer screen, I would immediately start to have essentially kind of like a panic attack type come on. Loud noises would really irritate me. And then another significant symptom that I was dealing with was, it's called tachycardia, which is basically my heart rate would just be elevated, and any sort of physical exertion, it would immediately just go up very quickly, and I would have a very hard time getting it back down, And so doing very simple things physically, felt like I was, running from a bear, or, it's hard to give an analogy to it. Some of the ways that I've imagined it is like kind of, like having a car and getting into your car, turning it on, and just like the dashboard is just turning into a light show. There's just everything's flashing, everything's going nuts. So, you try and start the car. As soon as you press a little bit on the gas pedal, just boom, it goes, starts redlining, and then it floods and dies, and you just have no idea what's going on, and that was kind of my experience early on. And I was able to eventually, I went to my doctor. My primary doctor wasn't very helpful. And at that point, I didn't really know what was going on, but was able to do some Googling, searching on the internet, and I had not heard anything about what's commonly called long COVID now, which has been around for a very long time, but just post-viral illness in general is what it's called. Was kind of able to hop on the community board, patient-led initiative stuff, and be like, oh shoot, I think this is me, which was very frightening, but also comforting in that I was able to find other people online that were dealing with similar things, and they through that community I was able to find at least camaraderie and people that were in a similar boat. I was working for the church at the time, working for Triumph, and they were very gracious in working with me to kind of really step back my duties just to what I could handle, and was able to at least keep working some, but I really was very limited in what I could do physically and mentally.
Yeah, it was very strange because I mean, right before that, you had invested a lot into your physical health, and were testing out different diet things, exercising a lot. You would go for runs all the time. So it was very surreal for me as a housemate to see you just kind of lying down on the couch and just knowing, yeah, you've been there all morning.
It was a while ago now, but there was this shift in my mindset after reading online and people that have dealt with this similar health challenge, and really was this flip of mindset to my job now is my first and highest priority job now is to heal and to rest, basically in some sense just to sort of survive. And I was very fortunate at the time. I was single, living with, sharing a house, and I actually had just purchased a house previous October. So we were only in there for about 3 months when this happened, but very fortunate to have people to lean on there, and have limited, sharing the expenses, of housing.
Right.
And so that allowed me to be financially okay during this time. I guess for maybe people that aren't familiar or don't know somebody that has experienced kind of chronic or ongoing or autoimmune issues, maybe in a nutshell, it's a little bit like as far as severity and the unknowns of recovery, it's a little bit like having a stroke. It was a very challenging time. Thankfully, by the grace of God, I started to notice improvements in my symptoms very slowly. The first time I've experienced my body basically failing me in any significant manner. I hadn't had any significant health challenges prior to this. And that's a very scary experience. And it's it changes your mindset for sure. Not knowing what the future holds and not knowing what this day holds, whether your body will hold up, whether you can complete a certain tasks as simple as being able to care for yourself, take care of yourself, make food for yourself, and very humbling. I definitely had to and chose to open up to people and to lean on other people and just be honest with what I was experiencing rather than trying to pretend that I was okay or that this was less than it was. That would be my early experience. I think we can maybe jump into the spiritual side too if you wanted to, or
Coming here today, seeing you recently had COVID again and bounced back really quick. So eventually you did get better. But kind of looking back, when all this first started happening, were there questions like on a spiritual level that came up, or did you find help leaning on certain practices?
yeah. So it was definitely a challenge spiritually. That's probably an understatement. I remember for a while when you experience something like that, you kind of have this, there's a very natural question of why me? And what I realized as somebody that has a background in theological training is when I was actually experiencing suffering for myself, and it wasn't suffering that was caused by a decision that I made necessarily. Could have made more decisions to not get COVID, but for the most part, that's unavoidable without taking extreme measures, which wouldn't have made sense because I didn't know I was going to have these health issues. But
Right.
it's almost a completely different question, asking why does God allow suffering, and why does God allow suffering to me? One is a very abstract, almost philosophical and theological discussion point, which I had many times. And then all of a sudden, when the suffering is happening to you, much of that argumentation, much of that discussion just dissolves and it's just gone. And in the moment, it's very hard to understand if God is who I believe him to be, good and powerful. Why would he allow this to happen to me? There is experienced parallels or similar things. I was oftentimes reminded of Job, and I felt like Job at times, and feeling like all this stuff my health was taken away from me in an instant, and I was very unsure I had no idea how much I was going to get back and how long it would take. And there were definitely some very, very low moments that I had, and unfortunately part of having this health condition, meant I had a lot of time by myself resting, but just thinking, and my mind would just go in loops. And part of it too being an anxiety. My whole system was just on overdrive, and that was definitely not helpful, and there were definitely times where the words of Job's wife were whispering in my ear, curse God and die. And I'd be lying if those words didn't sound appealing at times when I was in the midst of this in the midst of suffering like this. And I think there were times too where belief in God, or at least belief that God was good or that he was present, was an act of rebellion. I knew in my higher brain, however you want to think about that, my cerebral, the intellectual assent to the truth of God was not shaken, but my heart was, and believing that he was good for a time was very challenging. That being said, there were also definitely times where I felt God's presence very strongly in the midst of this, in that when my body was healing and things were going well, or even when I was just resting, and I took time to do lots of meditation, and part of that would be prayer. And there were times where I definitely felt the tangible, a very, I don't know, just a sense in my heart and mind that God was with me in this journey, that Jesus was right beside me, and those were not, that was not the majority of the time. The majority of time it was a struggle. And also too, if you have experienced chronic health issues or severe health issues, when you're in that survival mode, the philosophical questions, or the questions of that, I guess, magnitude of thought, you don't have the energy and capacity to actually think about those things. And so I was forced to just set that question aside for a time of, the why does God allow suffering, and even some of the why does God allow suffering for me. I just said, I have to set this aside, and I just have to focus on the little energy that I have of just trying to experience God, even if I don't even know how I feel about him anymore in this moment of suffering. I know I need his presence, and that would be what I would focus on. Additionally, leaning on the faith of others as well was very important in that time. And I actually deliberately reached out to a lot of people in my network that were not, day-to-day connections, and told them what was going on, and and had people pray with me and tell me, stories that they had of their faith walk, or if they'd experienced something similar. And that was very, very helpful in that time, and very humbling. And at some points, your choice is not whether or not you're going to suffer, or whether or not you're making good decisions in life. It's the only question you're faced with is, am I going to suffer well, or am I going to suffer poorly? And that was the way that I chose to frame it. And I was like, okay, what does it mean to suffer well? And for me, that meant trying to connect with other people, and trying to be a source of light and encouragement for other people that were suffering with similar things. And so there was actually another gal at my church who has had very similar issues after getting COVID. And actually, some of her stuff was worse than worse than what I was experiencing. And we had we were connected through somebody at the church, and so we still stay in contact. But I found being able to be a source of, light and truth in the middle of the, hold up a candle next to this other person's, in this dark cave of suffering that we're experiencing, was a very powerful thing. And in the midst of not knowing in the grand scheme of things why this is happening to you, being able to know that, excuse me, I'm choking up, but know that in this moment, I can be a light to this person, and in that very small way, that there's good coming from this,
Yeah. going into those moments and you finding help from other people on community forums or health forums, and then being able to be that for someone else.
Yeah, and I think that one of the, I don't want to say mantra, but maybe just uh, an anchoring phrase, just of how it's changed my view of church too, is that really, we there will always be, trouble in this world. There always will be suffering, but I think a rallying cry of the church can and should be that no one suffers alone, and I wanted to embody that. But we also live in a day and age where we expect there to be answers for everything, and in modern medicine as well, that maybe we don't have maybe the outlook isn't good, but we know the odds and we have a treatment plan. And for this case, for what I was experiencing, and post-viral similar conditions, there isn't, and doctors don't know what's going on. We have humans have a way of we give it a name, and then it gives this illusion of control over it. Well, medical conditions that end with syndrome, it really is just it's a collection of symptoms that come together, and then we give it a name, and that's what you have, and it doesn't mean that we can treat it or we actually know what's going on. And so it's very hard to wrestle with that, of like, okay, even some other things, and I don't believe in comparing suffering, but even walking down the road of cancer or something like that, it's not good, and it's life-changing and devastating. But a lot of times there's actually there is a path, and it's known, and this was challenging because many people with this that were suffering from similar things, doctors won't even believe them, or and even if they did, not really know, not really having a path, and so that was a part of a very change in mindset of realizing just how little control I have over things in life,
Yeah.
even my own body, and surrendering that to God, and just, saying, okay, like, faced with a shattered understanding, or, the certainty of your future just being completely wiped out, and then choosing to really, really focus in on getting through each day, and if that seems too much, getting through each hour, and if that's too much, just getting through the next breath, and trying to find peace in that, and surrendering the future to God. And that's something that has definitely stuck with me, of just this understanding of a certain amount of, that cherishing every moment, because I have a very tangible, visceral understanding of how fleeting health and life can be in general. And so not taking that for granted, and being grateful every day, waking up when my body does work well, by the grace of God, I'm basically able to function completely normally now, and have just a few lingering symptoms here or there that don't really affect my day-to-day life in any meaningful way, which is a huge blessing. And so part of my challenge too is, even as I've healed and moved on, remembering that perspective and not taking things for granted. And like, every time I do go work out, my body is doing what it's supposed to, and my brain is doing what it's supposed to, and being grateful for that, because there was a time where I didn't know if I'd be able to, ever exercise again, or, have hold down a full-time job, or be able to be smart and competent, and accomplish anything that I wanted to accomplish in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's lots of good stuff. Thanks for sharing. And
Yeah.
thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I appreciate it. you've been a part of that journey, and a number of other people I'm sure that are listening are aware of part of my story, and so I appreciate getting to share it. And hopefully, this is again part of the fruit that can come from suffering. And so, wherever you're at, I would encourage you to not be ashamed or hide stories of suffering. I think as Christians, sometimes we feel this pressure that we need to make God look good, or that as a Christian, I'm obligated to be happy. The Bible does talk about, joy in the midst of suffering. But I think that's not an easy place to be, and that's the reality is that life is hard. And I encourage people, if you're experiencing suffering, and two, we have this weird guilt. There's this weird guilt about health issues or something, that things that are largely outside of our control happening to us. And then like, we feel like, for me, it was just, there was a very long period where it was, well, what did I do wrong? In this, both in this like near term of like, oh, I shouldn't have gone to this event. I shouldn't have done this or that. And then, and all of this hindsight, but people have this sense of guilt of like, oh, I must have done something wrong because have a certain disease or illness that is just largely outside of your control, whether it's genetic or something else. But the one way for sure that that I touched on previously that can make sense of suffering is if you share it. And if you find somebody that is suffering as well, and that your suffering in your past can be an encouragement to them, that's one way I know that God redeems suffering. And so that would be my encouragement, I guess, for people. And oftentimes we don't like to talk about suffering. We don't like to talk about maybe an unfinished story or spiritual journey that we're on. And but I don't think we need to make God look good. His truth is his truth, and he is who he is through all eternity, past, present, and future. And so encourage people to just be more open, because I think that is what it means to be the church. So
Awesome. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.